Welcome everyone to today's presentation in support of White Ribbon Australia. I'm Claire, I'm a counsellor at Access Wellbeing Service.
Hi everybody, my name is Anil, I'm a counsellor at Centacare.
We're just going to head over to the PowerPoint and get started. So today's presentation in support of White Ribbon Australia, and White Ribbon Australia really aims to sharpen the focus on the prevalence of gendered violence and promote the prevention of harm to women and children. They do this in a number of ways, and we're here to kind of discuss how we can be a part of the solution to minimise the risk and the harm of gendered violence to women and children. But before we go much further, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this recording is created, and it's the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I'd like to pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So some of you may not have heard of White Ribbon Day before. It has been around for quite a long time. It's the world's largest movement engaging men and boys to end family violence against women and girls, promoting gender equality and to create new opportunities for men to build positive, healthy and respectful relationships. So obviously this is about equal responsibility for men and boys to ensure that women and children and girls feel safe. Family domestic violence is quite a broad concept, and it covers many areas. Some people think perhaps of family and domestic violence as just being a physical harm, but it's much more than that. It's any acts of violence that causes or could cause physical, sexual or psychological harm or suffering, including threats of harm or coercion in a public or private place. And obviously this is something across the world that everyone recognises is the definition of family domestic violence. So yeah, physical, sexual and psychological harm, it's quite broad, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So what is family and domestic violence? It's the ongoing patterns of behaviours intended to coerce, control and create fear within an intimate or familial relationship. And these behaviours are part of a wide range of tactics to exercise power and control over women and children. So there are some really three main concepts there of coercion and control in order to create fear and to have power and control over women and children. Kind of it's not okay in any way, shape or form.
Not at all.
But it's quite prevalent.
It is, yeah. So we understand that family domestic violence, whilst it's ongoing patterns, there's also a real cycle of violence that we can see. Can you describe what the cycle of violence is? Sure. So the cycle of violence describes different patterns that may occur in a domestic violent relationship. So it usually starts up with the build-up phase, and this is also known as the tension building phase. This is where tensions start to rise, where maybe the perpetrator starts to become angry, they might become distant, they might become cold, and so this is where tensions start to rise within the relationship. Next is the standover phase. This can be quite a scary phase because often victims describe feeling like they're walking on eggshells, just waiting for the violence to occur because the tension has escalated, and the perpetrator can often start to bring things in from the past and really start to escalate that tension, and unfortunately the victims can feel like the violence can occur at any stage at this point.
A bit like a hammer waiting over their head to fall, isn't it?
That's right.
It's a very kind of scary place to be.
That's right, and often women describe it as walking on eggshells. So just really watching themselves and really trying not to do anything wrong, which is a horrible position to be in. When I say anything wrong, anything that may involve violence, so not anything actually wrong, but anything that the perpetrator may see as an excuse to assault the woman.
Looking for an excuse.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think it's important we watch our language around that because it can turn into something that it's not. So then there's an explosion, which is the domestic violent incident. And like Claire was saying, this can involve more than just physical violence, or it doesn't involve only physical violence. It can be verbal, it can be social, it can be financial, it can be any form of domestic violence.
Then there's the remorse phase. So this is around, this can be quite misleading because it sounds like the perpetrator is feeling bad for what they did, but really it's a very victim mode stance. So it often involves them feeling sorry for themselves, not feeling sorry for what's happened. This could involve a lot of justifications for their behaviors and a lot of minimization and a lot of trying to make the victim feel guilty.
It's kind of saying, I'm sorry, but if you hadn't have done that, this wouldn't have happened. So placing the blame back on the victim of the violence.
Exactly. And it's really going into this way. It's me, look what position I'm in now, and that I've hit you, or that I've yelled
Look what you made me do.
Look what you made me do. Yeah, that's right. Then we get the pursuit phase, which can also be known as the the buyback phase. This involves trying to lure the victim back into the relationship, and it could involve a lot of different things like promises, like buying gifts, sending flowers, really trying to buy back the person into the relationship. And then after this one is the honeymoon phase, which is quite reminiscent of the initial courtship phase of the relationship. It could feel like everything's okay and that there was never an issue, and the perpetrators will often use this to almost gaslight the victim and say, look, we don't have an issue, right? Everything's going good. So that is the cycle of violence.
And I guess we've said a little bit in that we've termed the people who cause violence or commit the violence perpetrators.
That's right, yes.
And the person receiving the violence or impacted by the violence as victims. We can also think of them as survivors.
Survivors, that's right, yes.
Because we do know that a lot of women and children don't survive violence perpetrated by men to them. Particularly what we see with the cycle of violence is that it can escalate. So we can go from, small examples of control and like separating women from their family or from their friends is a form of control, and then coercion, making them do something they don't want to do, and then it can get bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where it's actually very dangerous.
That's right, and we all know that it can be unfortunately very fatal.
Why do you think, Anil, people allow this cycle to continue, whether it's the perpetrator or the survivor?
I think from a perpetrator perspective, it's very easy to not accept responsibility and to not look at what perpetrators can do to improve the behavior when they're stuck in the cycle of violence, right? I think it's a bit more complex when we're coming from a survivor perspective and victim perspective, in that look, in the cycle of violence, the buyback phase, the honeymoon phase can be quite mentally, psychologically, emotionally very confusing, because you got two extremes, right? You have, the explosion, which is a domestically violent incident, and then you have the pursuit phase, which is all about showering you with gifts and all about making all these promises of improvement and of this fantastic relationship. Then you have the honeymoon phase, where it's almost like for a small period of time those promises are being backed, and then you go right back into the build-up phase and the increase in the tension. So it can be quite very confusing and very challenging and complex to sort of step outside this cycle.
When I work with women who've experienced violence, they often say, well, it's not all bad, or they're not a bad person. But obviously this cycle, it all aims to create control within the relationship.
That's right.
The perpetrator or the man is deciding how the relationship is going. Is it going to be scary? Is it going to be exciting? Am I going to, tell you how wonderful you are, and then one day, blame you for everything that's going wrong in the world?
That's right, and there's a lot of deceit and manipulation involved in it. Like if you look at the pursuit phase and the honeymoon phase and even the remorse phase, it involves a lot of manipulation, deceit, and empty promises, and a lot of making the victim or survivor feel very guilty, and all these things. Yeah.
I think ultimately survivors of violence, they lose their sense of self. It's been eroded quite significantly. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of commitment, real bravery for women to leave relationships, because we know that leaving a violent relationship, whether it's psychological, emotional, sexual or physical, is a very dangerous time.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, a lot of people might say, or some people, I should rephrase that, and some people might say that, why didn't they just leave? And I think it's only when I started working within this field and really doing research around domestic violence till I started to understand the complexity involved within a domestic violence relationship. It is really not easy to leave. And there's so many factors involved when it comes to domestic violence and stepping outside the cycle or leaving the relationship.
Which is why it's really important that there are, services out there to support women and children experiencing violence or having survived violence, to rebuild their sense of self, but also get out safely. But also there are services for perpetrators of violence to change that cycle of violence in their life as well.
That's right. Yeah.